He traveled around the world in a backpack. And Kevan Chandler's story is an incredible example of true friendship. Taking a look at the Bible, Joshua gives a roadmap for a life of faith, and Bob Williams' sweet mission is unwrapping him into the Hall of Heroes. That's all coming up in episode 107 of Manly with Andy. Now joining the podcast, it's Kevan Chandler. Kevan, what do you think is the biggest challenge that men face today, and how do we overcome it?
I think that we are in kind of this weird pendulum swing where we had a generation where men didn't talk about their feelings, and now we're kind of in this weird nebulous area where men are supposed to be all about their feelings. And finding, I think the biggest challenge that we have right now is recognizing those things and still being proactive and leaders and men of God and men of character. That's the short answer.
Right. I could tell you could go deeper into that, but I want to just get into your story because it's so incredible. So let's start from the beginning. So you were born with spinal muscular atrophy. Talk about your childhood and growing up, and when did you realize that you were kind of different than other kids?
To answer that part first, I kind of always knew in some ways. My sister, who is 3 years older than me, also has the same disease. And so when I came along, it was kind of like, this is the norm. This is who we are. So I grew up in a wheelchair and also right alongside her in her wheelchair. And so for us, it was like, well, we're similar to each other, but we're different from everyone else. And we have an older brother who ended up, he's an artist. He does like cartooning and costume design and all kinds of really cool stuff. And so growing up in this environment of creativity between the three of us and really using our imaginations was a big part of our childhood, and also working together to use those imaginations and really bring them to life. My parents are equally creative and just really action oriented. They see something that needs to be done, they do it. And I woke up every day figuratively saying, well, what do I want to do? What can I do? And how do we kind of push that envelope and find a balance? And so we grew up kind of a pretty normal in the sense of like going to church and school, being in regular classes and going on field trips and playing soccer and t-ball and going to youth group camps and all that good stuff and having friends over. But all of that kind of took an extra step of effort and planning on our part as a family. We had an open door policy. People, like friends, were always over at our house, whether it was my parents' friends or our friends, us kids. And what that did was it kind of showed that community what our everyday life looked like. But then we also, as I said, we were out in the community as well. And so we got to really assimilate and be part of the community. And I think that translated into my young adult and adult life of like, I played in a band and went on tour and lived on my own in college. And so did my sister, and just really found ways to be part of the world around us despite being different.
What was it like growing up, making friends? I know you don't know what other people's experiences was like, but was it hard to do, or are kids at a younger age maybe more just accepting of people that are different?
Yeah, I think that is the case. For me, I'm not trying to brag, but just I think the way that God made me, I haven't really ever had a hard time making friends, and a key component to that, I think, it's like to make friends, you have to have friends kind of thing. And so having one or two kids, early on in life and even later on, like having one or two that were good friends, and then other people saw that and they were like, oh, okay, I can be friends with him too. And just kind of this, it just grows on itself. And I've seen that in friendship, but also in just, again, being part of the public square, being part of that community in the general public. Is if I roll into a restaurant or a coffee shop, people are going to kind of give me a weird look if I'm coming in by myself. But if I come in with two or three friends that treat it very normally, then everyone else kind of adopts that really quick. It's like the positive version of a mob mentality, you know.
Hmm.
And so yeah, I think God just really gifted me with a couple of guys, you know, when I was really young that played soccer with or just was in class with, and we both liked drawing comics or whatever it was. And you kind of find those things that are, even though you're different in some ways, you find similarities in other ways. And I think we all do that, whether a disability is involved or not. And then it just kind of goes from there because people see you having fun and they want to become a part of that.
So you said you grew up in a Christian household. Were there any moments where you looked at your life and your disability and you said, why God?
Mm, Not major crisis moments or anything. I think later in life, and maybe even more recently, I've had, I would say, moments of frustration, but never really a question of why. And maybe part of that is because I just didn't know anything different.
Hmm.
You know, I don't know what walking would look like. And even then,
Hmm.
if I was able to walk, would my arms be strong enough? Or if my arms were strong enough, would I have scoliosis? Would I still have rods in my back? You know, there's just so many, I think because it's a disease that kind of compounds on itself, I, the idea of it being something different has been hard to grasp. But also, I think, not to be obnoxiously positive, but I think what I've seen in my life as a result of my disability, the struggles lead to strengths. And I think that there are blessings and there are miracles sometimes in spite of my disabilities, but there are also blessings and miracles because of my disabilities. The relationship that I have with the Lord, the relationship that I have with the people around me, I wouldn't replace that for the ability to be an Olympic runner or to go for a walk on my own, you know. But I did mention, you know, maybe more recently having frustrations, and I think that comes from, I got married 4 years ago, and my wife is the most amazing person in the world, and she loves me just as I am, and I don't know, we just love celebrating life together. But in those moments where it's like, oh man, I wish I could bring her breakfast in bed or fold the
Hmm.
laundry or drive on the road trip instead of her having to do that. You know, that those
Hmm.
things kind of make me go, man, I would like to be able bodied to do those things. And then on the flip side of that, she's figured out how to have me help bring the groceries in, or I'll sit and read to her while she does the dishes, you know. So even though I have those frustrations at times, she has figured out ways, and we figured out ways together to answer those questions and those frustrations in our own unique way.
I love that, Kevin. And it's not a challenge that is unique to you. I feel that pull a lot with my wife too. I wish I could do more, and
Mm,
and she finally told me she could tell I was really trying, and I was just wearing myself out. And she goes, Andy, you don't have to earn my love.
yeah,
And I'm sure your wife has said things like that, but that was like the light bulb of I don't have to, like, you love me and you know I'm doing my best, so I don't have to try harder than what my best is.
yeah, yeah. You're right. I've heard the same thing, you know, from my wife, and I don't know if you've experienced this, but when Katie says things like that, it's like I hear her say that, but it's also
Hmm.
kind of Jesus saying it. You know, it's like, oh, right, I'm not earning anything here. I've been called to something, called into something, but it's not how I get to keep this or get it in the first place.
Well, let's jump into part of your miracle story
Mm,
about your journey with your friends across the world and also your nonprofit. What came first? Was it the nonprofit and this backpack that your friends used to carry you all over the world? Did that come first, or were you kind of like the guinea pig testing it out in different locations?
Yeah, maybe the guinea pig happened first, but they happened around the same time. After college, I was part of a potluck group, just a bunch of starving musicians in North Carolina trying to have a warm meal each week together. And we did that at different houses. And a lot of those houses, you can imagine, were not wheelchair accessible. And so I just had friends that we'd leave my wheelchair in the car or on the bottom floor, and they'd carry me up to the second floor apartment or third or fourth floor, and sit me on the couch or on the floor. And from that, I kind of had this idea of like, oh, I wonder what would happen if we intentionally did something like spent a weekend or something without my wheelchair. What would that look like? I brought it up to one of the guys, Tom. He said, well, we're not going to sit around playing video games. So how about we explore the sewers in our hometown? Because, we grew up on Ninja Turtles and Batman, and that sounds awesome. And so we put together a very rudimentary kind of rough backpack design and went down into the sewers one night. And, 3 hours later, we came out, and the question came up of, well, that was awesome. We survived. So what do we do next? A few months later, I proposed to Tom and a couple other guys. I said, hey, what if we did the same thing, but above ground for 3 weeks in Europe? And a year later, we were in Europe. And in that interim, we did a fundraiser to raise the money to go on the trip. And we worked out where we wanted to go and how we were going to do it. And we also designed a new backpack. We worked with a company called Deuter out of Germany. And we called them and basically said, we like what you have for a child carrier, but we want to break all the rules. So how do we do that? How do we do that well and safely and securely? And they worked with us for a few months and helped us put together a really great design. And we took that to Europe. And so during the fundraising process, we started hearing from families all over the world. And they asked two main questions. Where did you get this backpack? And where did you get these friends? And so right before we left for Europe, the idea was coming together of, oh, maybe we need to start a nonprofit to answer these two questions, because I'm just one person. And, when 4 or 5 people had emailed us, I was like, oh, I can take care of this. But when it went into the hundreds and thousands, it was like, oh, this is bigger than me. I need to have something else, some sort of entity set up. And I had a friend who was very wise, sat down with me. I remember it was after church one day. I told him the idea, and he said, well, you need to go on this trip and just have fun, because that's what everyone's looking at. And then when you get back, we will work on putting together a nonprofit. So he really kind of took that off my plate for a few weeks, and we took care of that when we got back. And of course, being on the trip just raised more awareness and brought it to more people's attention. And so when we were ready to form the nonprofit, there were a lot of people that wanted answers to those questions. And that's what we've been doing ever since.
Well, and I saw some of the videos, at least of you going through China. That looked incredible. Tell me about, so those 3 weeks, that's, first off, I would love to know this. Do you find being in the backpack, is it more freeing, even though you're more dependent on other people? You don't have your wheelchair, and you're fully dependent on the person that you're on their back. What was that experience like?
When we left for the trip, we were leaving the hotel to go to the airport down in Atlanta, and we put my chair in the van and parked it and got me in the backpack, and we left. And I didn't even think about the fact that I had just left my wheelchair behind for 3 weeks. And it took about a week to realize what that meant, because up until then I thought of the backpack as like the ultimate freedom. like, oh, I finally can go wherever and do whatever. But what I realized about a week into the trip, because we got to a place where we were in London for a day, and I was like, oh, like it's a sunny day, we're in the city. If I had my wheelchair, I'd be fine. I could just go off on my own. That's when I started missing it. And I realized that there are just two different kinds of freedom, because with the wheelchair, I get to decide where I go and I can go there as long as it's actually accessible. With the backpack, I can literally go anywhere regardless of accessibility, but I can't do it by myself. So yeah, it's like just two different kinds of freedom, not one better than the other. And I think both are really important to have in your life. Maybe not actually a backpack or a wheelchair, but this idea of having things that you can do on your own, but also things that you can't.
I'd love to hear about in your journeys. I know you met a lot of strangers, a lot of experiences. Do you have a story of just where you say God just showed up in a miraculous way?
Well, on that trip to Europe, we saw it every day. It was happening around every corner, especially through these friendships. I mean, I kind of like I was saying about my wife earlier, it's like every day I got to see these guys sacrificing so much, sometimes physically, sometimes mentally, or, the time of being there. I will say there was a day in Ireland we were driving along on the highway. We had rented a van and piled all the guys in it, and we had 2.5 weeks accident free, and everything was great. No injuries, no major fiascos. Getting lost a couple times, but that's all right. It's just more adventure. And on the highway, we had to slam on the brakes, and I fell forward and messed up my foot and broke my nose on the bench in front of me, and we had to pull over and get me out. And one of the guys patched me up, and another guy put ice on my foot and made sure it wasn't broken, which it wasn't. I remember in the moment, two thoughts went through my mind. One was, God, I thought that I was doing this to prove that it could be done. And now look what happened. And everyone said this, this would happen. You're going to get hurt. This is unsafe. This is dangerous, and you shouldn't do it. And this isn't what disabled people should do. And like, look at me now. Look at what my arrogance, my hubris led to. And I really felt like the Lord said, well, no, you did this to prove it could be done. That doesn't mean there's not going to be pain and difficulty. It means it can be done. Like, there's a big difference there. And you're still alive. It's okay. It's just add some scars to the story, and that's okay. And I actually realized that makes it even more beautiful, because it means even when it is hard, it can be done. And then the second thought was, in that moment, I felt very alone. And I said, Lord, will you bring someone in my corner? Like, I mean, I was in a lot of pain. And again, I felt like he said, well, open your eyes. I have 6 guys around you. I have 6 guys in your corner right now. And I'm in your corner. Like, you're not alone at all. And I literally opened my eyes, because I was squeezing them shut from the pain. But I opened my eyes, and I saw Tom and Ben and Philip and Robbie and Luke and Jameson. I saw all these guys around me. And was that 6? I lost count. But anyways, and so I think, it's moments like that where in those lowest moments, we get to see the Lord shine through, right? The most.
There's so much more to Kevan's story. You can find out more about it in his children's book called We Carry Kevan. You can also check out his nonprofit called We Carry Kevan, and he's got a lot of great videos online too. Thanks so much for taking some time to do this. And I guess one more question for you, Kevan. What would you say? I'm hoping a lot of parents maybe that have children who maybe have disabilities listen to this. What would you say to them to encourage them as they're trying to raise their children in a world that may not quite understand what their kids are going through?
Yeah. Well, I would say kind of in tandem with that, there we have the children's book, which I think is a great way to. It's a great thing to share with kids who have disabilities as a way to say, hey, look, you're not alone. And it's a great way to introduce disabilities to kids who aren't maybe as familiar or aware, who are able-bodied. And it's just a great book about friendship and caring for one another. So I think for the disabled community, it's a great introduction to the idea of inviting people into your need. And that's something I would share with parents is, train your kids up in a way that they are comfortable with saying, hey, will you help me with this? Or, hey, I'd love to bring you into this project or this idea or this need that I have, not only as a way to help the child, but as a way to help the person that they're inviting in. I've found that because my needs are so intimate, it allows, for me as a guy, it allows a bond of brotherhood between me and other guys that, we don't, as men, we don't really get to experience or enjoy all that much in this world. And so yeah, I encourage parents to train their kids up to see the needs that they have themselves and see the needs of the world around them and say, not, and say, okay, so how is my need not a barrier, but actually a tool in my tool belt to care for those other needs and care for others. We have the children's book. We also have a grown-up book, I guess we call it, but it records the adventure of going to Europe and talks a little more in depth about my childhood and how we ended up in Europe, and we went to China after that too. So parents could also read that.
Now taking a look at the Bible, starting in Joshua 22, verse 1, then Joshua called together the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. He told them, you have done as Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, and you have obeyed every order I have given you. During all this time, you have not deserted the other tribes. You've been careful to obey the commands of the Lord your God right up to the present day. And now the Lord your God has given the other tribes rest, as he promised them. So go back home to the land that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you as your possession on the east side of the Jordan River. But be very careful to obey all the commands and the instructions that Moses gave to you. Love the Lord your God, walk in all his ways, obey his commands, hold firmly to him, and serve him with all your heart and all your soul. So Joshua blessed them and sent them away, and they went home. This reads like the end of an epic battle movie where the general is congratulating his troops and saying, yeah, you can go home now. But I just love the instructions here that it's good for us today too. He says, be careful to obey all the commands Moses gave you. Love the Lord your God, walk in all his ways, hold firmly to him, and serve him with all your heart and soul. So in just a few sentences, Joshua gives us all a roadmap. Obedience, love, commitment, service. It's not just rules, it's a lifestyle. Now entering the Hall of Heroes, Bob Williams. For more than 15 years, Bob Williams, known fondly as the Candyman of Long Grove, Iowa, has spread joy through a simple yet profound gesture, handing out king-size Hershey bars to anyone he encounters on his daily rounds. Stocking his fridge with over 500 bars, Bob has handed out more than 6,000 pieces of chocolate. And Bob never intended to do this for the fame. He did it to honor his late wife, Mary Elizabeth. He sits on her memorial bench every day, sharing chocolates and carrying her memory with him. Hershey's found out about his mission and contributed $1,500 to keep the encouragement going, and even joined his 94th birthday celebration, proving that Candyman's kindness is truly contagious. So because Bob Williams uses chocolate to brighten lives and reminds us all to share joy in even the smallest ways, he is officially in the Manly with Andy Hall of Heroes. How do you figure out God's will for your life. Trevor Hudson has some advice. Taking a look at the Bible, a misunderstanding was solved by doing one simple thing. And Joel Spear's unique interests has garnered international visibility. And it's his boost into the Hall of Heroes. It's coming up next week on Manly with Andy.